Hi guys, my name is Julie. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are finally doing my November reading wrap up. I have still not done my September and October ones. I honestly don't know if those are going to get done. However, today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of November. I ended up reading 13 books total in November. I will be putting the genres of the books on the screen while I talk about them. I don't have my stats, which I should have done, but I read 13 books. And the first book that I read is Pumpkin Spice and Poltergeist by Ali K. Mulford and K. L. Morrison. This is a sapphic cozy fantasy following two main characters. It is in dual point of view. We are following Jordan. She is an apothecary witch, and at the beginning of the novel, she is kind of reeling from the loss of her ex-girlfriend, and she's looking for some closure, so she ends up summoning her ex-girlfriend in her ghost/poltergeist form and kind of just asking for closure between them. And what ends up happening is that her girlfriend cannot go back to the other realm that she was in. So Jordan and Lou, who is Jordan's ex, basically formulate this idea that, oh, Lou can't go back because I need closure, and so in order to find closure, I need to fall in love. And that's how we bring in the main character, Harlow, who is our other female main character. She has just moved to this town, and it is a very magical town. There's a lot of witches and monsters and everything under the sun, and basically she has just moved into town to work at her sister's cafe. She is a human as well as her sister, so she's kind of like developing a experience. I'm not really sure how to word that, but like she's kind of just learning more about this town. And one day while she's working at the shop that her sister owns, she ends up going to the apothecary in order to get some supplies and ingredients to make a specific customer's order. And there she meets Jordan. Lou is kind of pressuring Jordan into asking Harlow out, so Jordan does ask Harlow out. And it's kind of this thing where Jordan is trying to go on these dates with Harlow, get to know other people, and fall in love in order to send Lou home. But there's also this other side plot of Jordan and Lou trying to figure out what actually happened to Lou, because Lou feels like her death was not entirely an accident and that something else was happening. So her and Jordan are trying to figure that out, and then Jordan is also kind of developing this relationship with Harlow. I really liked the mystery aspect of this book. I feel like it was very entertaining and it just like added a lot more to the story than I thought it was going to be. However, the romance part of the story was what was lacking for me personally, and that's why I ended up giving this book a 3.5 stars. I feel like the whole concept of this like cozy little town with a lot of magic was interesting. I feel like it just wasn't built up enough. Like there would be conversations where Harlow is asking her sister questions about this town, and then her sister would be like, oh, that's information for another day. Or she'd be talking to another character and they'd be like, oh, ask your sister, and then that conversation doesn't happen. And for me, that felt like a little bit of a cop-out. Like, I know you can't explain every single detail of this city, especially because it is going to be, I think, an interconnected series. However, I feel like we could have gotten a little bit more world building in order to fully develop the world that we're in and make the characters care about kind of like the reality and the troubles that are happening within this city, because there's also some like conflict going on externally. And I feel like that kind of like not explaining things also happened within the relationship between Harlow and Jordan. I feel like their relationship, I could definitely tell that they were physically attracted to each other because they kept bringing that up. They'd be like, oh, she's so pretty, she's so hot. And like, that's great. But like, where's the emotional connection? Because I feel like a lot of the times in this book, they would say, oh, we had this 6-hour conversation just talking about everything under the sun. And I'm like, well, we didn't see you talk anything about that. So I didn't personally see their connection on paper. I feel like we kind of just glanced over things. And I don't really prefer that in a romance. I do like more emotionally driven romances where I can tell why the characters like each other, but from what we saw on paper, I just didn't see the connection between them, and I didn't really see that they knew anything about each other, and especially because this book only takes place over like the span of a week, so it's not really much time to get to know another person, and we didn't really see any of that on paper. So while I did like the mystery aspect, I didn't really connect to the romance or see a connection between the characters, so that did hinder my enjoyability a little bit. But I do think it was a really cute cozy fantasy. Like if you're looking for a sapphic cozy fantasy, I would definitely recommend this. It just wasn't my personal favorite, and I did want a little bit more from the romance. Moving on, I feel like I just talked for like 5 hours about that book. The next book that I read was The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is book 3 in the Folk of the Air trilogy, the first book being The Cruel Prince. This was a reread for me. I ended up doing a reread, and I actually posted a reading vlog if you want to watch that, rereading this trilogy. I ended up giving this a 4 stars upon reread. This was my favorite book in the series the first time I read it, but this time around I feel like the first book, The Cruel Prince, was my favorite in the series. Overall, I think the character development in this series, especially for the main character Jude, who is basically a human living in a fairy realm because she was orphaned by her parents murderer who ended up taking, okay, I'm not describing that well. Her parents were murdered, and then the murderer of her parents took her and her siblings to live in the fairy realm because he is fae. And so that's basically where she grew up. Her parents' murderer raised her. And so basically she kind of just wants to prove herself in this court as a human living in a fairy world because they are very discriminatory against humans, the fae are. And so I just think that her character development throughout the series, she became a lot more mature and less naive and more stood her ground, and I really enjoy her character. I feel like she is very cool and very determined to get what she wants. This book wasn't my favorite. I feel like it definitely slowed down a little bit towards the ending. I really like the way that the first half of the book goes because book 2 lives off on like a bit of a cliffhanger, and then book 3 kind of picks up off of where that kind of ended. And I feel like it's very entertaining the way that that went, but I feel like the events that unfold towards the ending of the book slow the plot down a bit. However, I still think that it ends well, and I really like the characters of the series and just the series as a whole. I feel like it is a very solid YA fantasy, and especially like with political intrigue and this subplot of like enemies to lovers. And it is just a very good time. If you have not read the Cool Prince series and you want to try it, I would recommend the series. I do really enjoy the characters, and I feel like the world is just very magical. I don't even know how to talk about this next book, and that is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This book is weird and kind of unhinged, and I feel bad that I enjoyed it because it is like very dark, and I feel like the themes and just the stuff that happens in the book is very concerning. So this is a book following our main character Irina. In her free time, she likes to photograph men, but more explicitly, and that is kind of like what she enjoys doing with her life. On the other hand, she is a bartender, but at the beginning of the novel, something happens at her work and she ends up getting this paid sabbatical. So we are having all this time to see her basically live her life and just photograph men. And it is a very interesting take on like the spiral into insanity. I feel like it's kind of Black Swan coded, like the way that the main character starts to slowly lose her mind and lose grasp of reality because of the things that have happened in her past, which you do cover throughout the novel. It is reminiscent of that, but just like I feel like with more American Psycho coded character. I found this book to be really entertaining. Like I was just binging it, honestly. Like it felt very short. Like it is a shorter book. I think it's like 200 something pages. However, I feel like I was not looking at the page count at all. I was kind of just sitting there binging it because it was so entertaining and so out of pocket, the things that were happening, that it was like a dumpster fire that you can't look away from. And I did enjoy it, but it is very dark and like a lot of the stuff was very gross. So I feel like you should check your trigger warnings and just know what you're going into. Like this book is satirical, but it's still like pretty graphic. So just know what you're going into for this one, but it is entertaining. The next book that I read is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. This is in a fair literary fiction. We are following two best friends, but it is in the point of view of one of the best friends whose name is Frances. Frances and Bobby have been friends since they were younger. They also used to date, so there's this kind of like tension between them. But as a whole, this book follows Frances and Bobby as they meet this other poet at a poetry reading. She is a lot older than them and she is married. One day, this writer invites Bobby and Frances to come to her house and have dinner with her and her husband. And that kind of evolves into this messy dynamic between the four of them because Frances and Bobby both develop feelings for the wife and husband in the relationship. And it becomes very messy. This book focuses a lot on the relationship between Frances and Nick, who is the writer's husband. It is entertaining, I feel like, more so in the beginning than that last part. For me personally, I feel like the last part works to flesh Bobby and Frances out more as characters and focuses more on their dynamic than the other dynamic between Nick and Frances. But it is a very toxic, like, polycule in this. I feel like it is just a very entertaining and messy read. I didn't enjoy this as much as I loved Normal People by Sally Rooney. However, I do think it was entertaining, and as always, Sally Rooney packs the punches with her quotes and her writing. It's just very well written, and I feel like all her characters to a point are very relatable, and that's not necessarily in the best way. Like, they're not, oh, super nice characters. They kind of like all suck in some way, and I feel like that is a very real and relatable thing. And so I do enjoy Sally Rooney's writing, and I enjoyed this for what it was. I just feel like the story was not maybe for me. Other people might enjoy this a lot more, but I did think this was a very solid book. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, but I did enjoy it. I just think that some aspects slowed down a lot for me, and I wasn't as interested in some parts. The next book that I read was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This book was a bit disappointing for me. I honestly had really high hopes because it's kind of marketed as like Hunger Games but with vampires. And I would say that it is more high stakes than some of the other Hunger Games related books that I've seen. We are following our main character, Oriah. She is a human that was raised by the leader of like the vampires, basically, or like one race of the vampires. I read this a while ago, but basically we're following Oriah. She was orphaned and raised by the emperor, and so she grew up knowing that humans are very vulnerable to the effects of vampires and that vampires do not really care so much about human lives. And so she was very wary of them growing up, and she wants to be strong. She doesn't want to see or be perceived as weak anymore. And so she gets this opportunity to go into the games, and if she ends up winning these trials, games, whatever you want to call them, then she can get this gift from a goddess, and she is looking to gain more power because of that and through those means. And so basically we're following her as she goes into these trials in order to get her end goal, which is power. And she ends up having to ally with another vampire named Rain, and it's kind of like a romantasy between them. For romantasy, I feel like the romance, it was definitely prevalent. I feel like it is like spicy a little bit, so like if you don't like that, maybe don't read this. I didn't particularly like that part as much. I feel like in romantasy, a lot of the times we kind of lose the plot, and I feel like that didn't happen in this book. Like we kind of just did focus on the plot, however, added this romance subplot. And I would say it's more than a subplot, like it was very prominent in like the way that they were thinking, but I did like how Oriah as a main character didn't forget what her goals were and what her aspirations were in order to kind of have this romance. There was still a lot of individuality between them, even though they were relying on each other for protection in one means or another. Like, I don't think it's necessarily bad, I just don't think it was for me personally. Like, I felt like I liked the vampire aspect more, but I think I'm just burnt out on vampire books, if I'm being completely honest. I've read so many this year, and I think I'm just kind of tired of that concept, if I'm being completely honest. But I do think it was entertaining, and I can see why people liked it, but I ended up giving it a 3 stars. There were just some aspects about the book that I didn't enjoy, and I feel like as a whole, I'm just not the biggest romantasy person, even though I did say that I feel like the romance isn't like taking over the entire plot. I didn't really like the main male character. He was kind of boring to me, if I'm being honest. Like, he kind of felt like how every other broody male main character is, and I didn't feel like we knew much about him, so yeah. Next book that I read was another reread, and that was Lightlark by Alex Astor. I wanted to reread this because the 3rd book in the series came out, and I thought that would be the final book in the series. I thought it was going to be a trilogy. It is not, but we'll come back to that in a second. This book follows this main character, Isla, and she is the ruler of the Wildling realm. In this world, there are a couple of realms with different leaders. I think there's 6 of them. Yes, there are 6 of them. Lightlark is an island that appears every 100 years in order to host the centennial, and that is when the leaders of all of the realms gather and compete in these trials kind of games in order to lift the curses that were placed upon their people. Isla is one of the youngest leaders. She has never been to a centennial before, and so this is her first time going. She is going there, and she's basically performing in these trials, trying to get this curse lifted for her people because it is slowly leading to her people becoming extinct. And so we're following all of the leaders as they're kind of like lying and manipulating each other in order to get their curse lifted. And at the end of the centennial, one of the leaders has to die. So it is pretty high stakes, but at the same time, it doesn't stress you out like high stakes usually will. I feel like for trials and games, like it wasn't that necessarily the trials were always super high stakes. Some of them were more scary than others, but some of them were more relaxed and kind of focused on manipulating players and showing their weaknesses more so than physically injuring them. I feel like I'm over explaining that, but basically I enjoy this. I give it a 4.5 star. I like this more upon my reread. I like Isla as a character in all the other realms. I feel like it is a very interesting dynamic. Throughout the book, you get to learn a lot more about each realm and kind of the way that that works in comparison to other ones. And as a concept, I really enjoyed it. I did enjoy the writing. I feel like it was very easy to read and not too complicated, but still had like a pretty expansive world. I was super excited to jump into the 2nd book, and I did end up starting the 2nd book. I think I got maybe like 50 pages in, and then I decided to DNF the rest of the series. And that's not because I think it's bad. I am going to keep my copy of Lightlark because I do really enjoy this book. However, I'm unhauling the 2nd book, which I think is Nightbane. This book series, I thought it was going to be a trilogy. However, it's actually going to be 5 books. I'm not sure if the 5th book is actually going to be like a novella or something. But upon reading the 2nd book, I just realized that I don't really care where the story is going to go, and I don't really think I care enough about the world to see where it ends up going within the future books, and enough about the love triangle, because there is a love triangle between Two Rulers and Eyes Love. And like, while I think this is a very solid first book in a series, I just don't think I personally will be continuing the series. Like, I'm fine just looking up to see what happens, and that's pretty much that. I don't think I'm going to continue this series, but I do think this is a solid book, and if you care a lot about the world and where that would go conflict wise past this book, then I would still recommend it. But I am okay just reading this book. The next book that I read was a memoir by Carmen Maria Machado called In the Dream House. This memoir is written about a toxic relationship that the author had in the past with another woman, and kind of just her experience with that, but it's told in the style of like literary vignettes using motifs. The writing in this was very interesting. I feel like I don't really read a lot of nonfiction. However, it was very moving, and to see like kind of the development of this relationship to a toxic state and kind of how the author navigated that, and also in a way that is like also talking about different topics that should be talked about. I feel like also the way that she was able to incorporate other heavy-hitting topics as well and like talk about her own views on that was very interesting, and I think it was very well written. I don't rate memoirs or nonfiction books a lot of the time. I also don't really rate classics. There's also just a lot of like motifs in this. There is a choose your character kind of thing in this, in which like you can see different scenarios by reading certain passages, and it kind of like guides you where to go. That was really cool. I really didn't expect something like that. Like, it was just so unique and a very interesting way of like conveying information, and I really enjoyed this memoir. I think it was very insightful. So the next 3 books that I read completely ruined the rest of the month for me. No, I'm kidding. But it was just a time. And this series, I just posted a reading vlog of me reading this series. It is spoiler free, so if you want to see my full thoughts while I'm reading it, you can go there, because I'm not going to talk too heavily about this, otherwise I will probably lose my mind. And that is the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Moore that starts with Gideon the Ninth. This series is so complex and so entertaining and so just unlike anything I've ever read in my life. It is a sci-fi series, kind of like a locked door murder mystery in a way, at least in the first book it is, and then it kind of develops and this world just gets so much more complicated than you would think. It is just one of those that you have to read it to experience it. Like, I really can't convey what happens in this book. I'm not even gonna try, honestly, because I will probably butcher it. Like, I know what happens in my brain, but it's just something you have to experience and something you have to read for yourself. And also the audiobooks for the series are literally so good. A billion times recommend this. It is amazing. I did end up rating all of these books like within the 4 to 5 star range within my reading vlog, but at the end of the day, they're all gonna get 5 stars, because it's not like a 6-star read for me, but it's a 5-star because it is just so good. I love this series. It is one of my favorite series now. I mean, nothing's ever gonna top the Poppy War in the Hunger Games. However, this is very entertaining, super unique. I really love the characters. I just connect so much to them. And it's so messy and so like complicated at times, but it is so entertaining and just so unique. And I feel like it is just something, again, that you need to experience for yourself, because it's not something that I can convey to you. And after that, I took a break from reading because I was just so like, I was like, wow, like we don't even have the 4th book out yet, which is The Elector of the Ninth. I'm praying for an announcement next year for like a release date or a cover reveal or anything. I just need the next book immediately. Ugh, it's just such a time. You just have to experience it. But the next book that I ended up reading is The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon. We are following a main character named Taliesin. She was orphaned because of the Hurricane Wars, and she grew up wanting to fight for her country. At the beginning of the novel, we kind of see like the turmoil between these two countries. There is a Knight Emperor of a different kingdom, and basically he is who is kind of just trying to overtake. We are following Taliesin. She also has this light weaving power that is very rare, and because of this, at the beginning of the book, whenever she encounters the son of the Knight Emperor, he is very entranced by her. He wants to work with her in order to build a strong bond with like powers, because he also has a power of his own, and he basically just becomes like obsessed with her and kind of just thinks about her all the time. It is dual point of view, and it's supposed to be an enemies to lovers thing, and I feel like I can't really explain what else happens in this book without spoiling it, because it's not in the synopsis, so I don't want to say it, but there is like forced proximity. Something happens, and like I said, Taliesin is an orphan, but she learns more about her heritage, and it kind of changes the course of where the plot of this book goes. And so her and the male main character, whose name is Lightlark, have to basically spend a lot more time together. And I feel like this is one of the cases, like I said earlier, how I feel like sometimes romantasy, you kind of sacrifice the plot for the romance. Like at the beginning, there was a really strong plot. There is Taliesin fighting in this army for her country in the Hurricane Wars. However, the way that the story develops, it does develop in a way that it very much pushes the romance to a higher level and kind of makes it more of a central focus to the story, and it makes sense for the way that it goes, but it doesn't mean I enjoyed it. So I was kind of sad with the way that some things went throughout this novel and the way that the plot kind of diminished. I do think that it will be built up in further books. However, I feel like we did focus a lot on like the romance between Taliesin and Lightlark. I feel like I just wanted the plot to plot, and it just wasn't plotting without the romance. And so that's kind of like my personal gripe with this book, is just that it had a very interesting plot and a very interesting world, and I feel like it could have been built up a lot more than it was. I don't actually know if I rated this, but I did get an art copy of the second book before I finished this book, and now I kind of don't really want to continue in the series, but I probably will anyways, just because I have the arc and because I do want to see if this world develops plot-wise. I feel like it is a very interesting world, and I feel like the dynamics between the powers and then the way that the kingdoms are set up could lead for a very interesting plot. I just hope that that's the way that the author takes the story, because I feel like we did focus a lot on the romance. Next book that I read this month was House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This book is interesting. We are following Marion. She grew up in the slums of her town, and she was orphaned at a young age. She grew up with her brother, but over time her brother became more abusive towards her, and so she's not really happy in the way that she's living right now. She is currently working as a maid to one of the richer families, and she's just not happy. So she's always checking the newspapers and checking for people potentially hiring blood maids. And blood maids are basically people who go to the houses of these rich people who offer them this contract where they can live there, they can pay for their stipend and their food and all of their living necessities if the blood maids bleed for them. Because the rich people in this world believe that blood and drinking blood gives you health benefits and like other benefits. It kind of just follows our main character Marion. She goes to the north and goes to live in the House of Hunger, where she's serving this countess and basically bleeding for her. There are a couple of other blood maids, so there's dynamics between them, and then over time our main character Marion just develops this relationship between her and the countess. And so it's very interesting, all of the different dynamics. I feel like there's a lot of power play in this book, and it's very entertaining. There are like thriller aspects to this because Marion over time begins to notice things that are odd within this house and things that don't really add up, don't really make sense, and she starts to investigate things, finds out some terrible stuff about what happens and what's going on. So there are a lot of thriller and kind of like mystery aspects to this, and I really enjoyed that. It was very entertaining. It is a pretty short read, however, I would say that it was pretty developed. I liked a lot of the characters. I feel like they all had very different motivations and were all pretty complex, I feel like, for how short this book is, especially Marion, the main character. And we get like a lot of her internal monologue and get to know like how she's feeling very well. I feel like the writing allowed for so much to happen in such a short period of time, but it was so entertaining and so bingeable, and I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars. So yeah, I like this one. Wow, I feel like I've literally been talking for hours, but the last book that I read was A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. Can we take a second for these sprayed edges? Beautiful, beautiful. In this book, we are following Effie. She is an architecture student studying at the university, and she gets this opportunity to go to the manor, to the estate of her favorite author who has just passed away, in order to kind of like reinvent the place. And when she gets there, she realizes there is another student from her university. He's actually part of the literature college, and so whenever she gets there, she meets him, and there's kind of this like rival thing going on between them, and he is kind of trying to disprove that the author, who is her favorite author, wrote all of his work. And so she's very intrigued by this, but also kind of offended because she grew up connected to this author's stories. And so there's like a lot of interesting dynamics. I would check trigger warnings. There were things that I wasn't expecting in this book. I think as like a whole, this is just a historical fantasy with like dark academia vibes, a rivals to lovers romance, and like also kind of an unreliable narrator, because you don't really know exactly if what she's seeing is what she's actually seeing. And I feel like the mystery aspect of this was really entertaining. The world was honestly very whimsical and very atmospheric. It is like a gothic-y novel, and I feel like the writing just very heavily lent towards like that gothic feel and towards like a dark spooky atmosphere, especially because this house is on the edge of a cliff and it's slowly kind of eroding, so you're kind of like on the edge of your seat at some points of the book. Overall, I think this was really good. I ended up giving it a 3.5 at the time, but I honestly think I might bump it up to a 4 just because I did feel like while I wasn't reaching to pick this book up, every time I did read it, I was immediately immersed into the story just because of the writing style and the way that everything was just kind of like explained. I feel like the romance between the characters as well was pretty well done. It was more slow burn than I thought it'd be, honestly, and I really appreciated that because for a short book, like a slow burn, I feel like is never really done well. And in this case, I felt like, in my personal opinion, it was done well. And I also liked the characters and their ending and like how it all went. I just thought it was a really, really good like gothic dark academia novel with like fantastical elements. I do think it was a bit predictable, but I don't know if it was supposed to be. Yeah, this is one I'd recommend if you like gothic dark academia novels. I also like unreliable narrators, so I did enjoy this. And I do really want to pick up more of Ava Reed's books in the future. I want to read her new book coming out next year. It is, I think, A Fable for the End of the World or something like that. It's marketed as like Sapphic Hunger Games, and that's literally all you need to tell me and I will pick it up. So I'm very excited to get into more of her books. This one was really good and I gave it 4 stars, not a 5 stars. But yeah, we have finally gotten to the end of the video. I feel like I was just talking way too much about those books when it just didn't need that much of an explanation. However, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I enjoyed filming it and talking about the books that I read this month. It was a pretty good reading month, I'd say. I feel like we had like kind of a mix between like some 3 stars, some 4 stars, and obviously the Locked Tomb trilogy being a 5-star series. I feel like it was a good reading month and I am excited for many more good reading months. Can't talk today. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want to do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!